What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to the first episode of the new podcast with Josh Jacobs and myself. We'll call it Philosophical Differences. Josh came up with the idea. So, Mo, if you're watching, don't blame me. I did think it was
Oh,
I did think it was funny, though. I did think it was clever. Well, no, because I do the low-hanging fruit with Charlie, and that one is just
yeah.
like, hey, what do we call this thing? And Charlie was like, what about low-hanging fruit? And I was like, I don't know. It's kind of cute, kind of clever. I still don't really know. They say Mo said that at one point. I've never seen video of it. I
Yeah.
know that it's out there somewhere, but I've not been able to track it down. But philosophical differences, we definitely know that was said. But just tongue in cheek, that's what we're going to call it. It's going to be Cardinals talk. It's going to be baseball talk. And Josh and I will try to get together as semi regularly as we can. Usually Fridays, I think, is going to be the target that works for both him and I. And we'll have some fun with it. So, Josh, appreciate you being here with me. You're obviously with Dealing the Cards, so everybody should follow Dealing the Cards pod. You guys do a lot of live streams, right? That's kind of your
Yeah.
main squeeze, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's fun because you can get like the live interactions in there, which I know you do some of those as well, late night. So it makes difficult though because we got to be there on time, so we don't
Right.
really have much flexibility there. But it's fun. So we've got a draft live stream coming up Sunday, so we'll be live streaming during that, and we'll be draft first 10 picks. That'll be really interesting because there's not really a consensus on who's going 7. You look everywhere the mock drafts. It's Rayner here, it's Weatherholt there, it's Smith there, Dreaming on Burns somewhere else. So it'll be really interesting to see how the board falls.
Yeah, for sure. And the Cardinals, I think a lot of people would like to see them maybe draft one of those college pitchers if they get the
Yeah.
chance to do it. But we'll leave that to Sunday. So check that out on their live stream Sunday. I don't know that I don't think I'll be trying to compete with y'all on that, doing anything live on Sunday. But we'll probably eventually on B-Schaeff Daily talk about the Cardinals draft pick and everything. But today we're going to focus a little bit more on this year's team. And Josh was diligent enough to throw me some topic ideas. And I said, all of them look amazing because I know when Josh and I sit down, we usually just are able to go, and wherever the conversation leads is fine. But we'll start with this, Josh. How good can this Cardinals team be? We've seen an uptick since Mother's Day, right? Like that was really when the turnaround began. It was right on the heels of a really bad stretch for the Cardinals. I think they lost 7 in a row or whatever that was. And you're like, oh, is this a redux of 2023? We were looking pretty smart for that podcast we did early on, asking about a rebuild. And then everything kind of turned around. The Cardinals obviously lost 2 games on Wednesday, and that was weird and bizarre. We won't get too hyper fixated on that because generally they've been pretty good over the last couple of months, really. I think it's only 3 times that they've lost consecutive games, and they'll play on Friday night against the Cubs, trying to avoid that first time of 3 consecutive losses in the last 2 months. But how good can this Cardinals team be? I'll drop it to you, Josh. What's your impressions of where the team's at right now?
Yeah, and to your point about the consecutive losses, I was looking back, I was like, when was the last time the Cardinals lost a series? And you have to go back to the
Yeah.
Miami meltdown. Like they've split with the Reds, but otherwise they've won or split every series since Miami. So except for the sweep, obviously, from the Royals, it's a 2-game doubleheader, whatever. You're frustrated by it, but I'm not
What do
taking
you
a
think
lot
about
in it.
this? So on the radio show, on the big show that we do on KTGR in Columbia, I mentioned to my co-host, I never should have said it, but I mentioned like, oh, I didn't send the tweet. Like I always send the tweet when the Cardinals are involved in a sweep, good or bad. But I was like, really? Was I going to be that guy? A 2-game sweep against the Royals? And that show is based in mid-Missouri. So it's like a close to 50-50 split in
Yeah.
that town of Cardinals Royals fans. And so my co-host kind of was implying that I only didn't send it because I didn't want to give the Royals their flowers. I think it's fair to say I'm not going to be that guy to pile on when it's a 2-game sweep in a weird doubleheader. I laid off of it, but maybe I should have and maybe sent the tweet. What do you think?
I don't know. It's a 2-game thing to me. I mean, you probably want it on the other end if they swept the Royals. Everyone's like, ah, Cardinals swept the
I did
Royals.
say if they
So
won this series, I would have sent the tweet. So that may be where I'm a little bit of a hypocrite. But anyway, how
yeah.
good can the Cardinals be? That was the question. Go for
Yeah.
it.
I think a lot of it's relative to the state of the National League right now, right? Like all season long, everyone's been saying for sure the Phillies and the Dodgers are the 2 best teams. And you have no questions about the Phillies, right? Star-studded, but we've seen what teams like that can do in the playoffs. It just takes literally a 2-game, 3-game series or 3 games to fall apart. And so that's kind of the beauty of the postseason and also the annoying part of it. You look at the Dodgers right now, and they have like a Hall of Fame rotation on the injured list right now.
Yeah.
Their actual healthy rotation right now is probably headlined by James Paxton is their most established guy that's healthy right now. They've got 3: Gavin Stone, Landon Knack, Justin Werbersky. I don't even know how to say his
Stop
name.
making up names. Stop it,
I,
Josh. It's
I mean,
embarrassing.
but that's the thing with the Dodgers is it's like, well,
Yeah.
they're actually probably pretty good. So that's the frustrating part. But then you look at the bottom of their lineup too. Like Pages bats 5th most days for them. Outman's in there and he hasn't been good. Chris Taylor's awful and plays every day. It's like,
Yeah.
Dodgers are, I mean, obviously you can't compete with their top four, but they're vulnerable. And that's what we saw last postseason too. They had Lance Lynn going, they Clayton Kershaw blew up, they fell out. The Braves, obviously, like I know they're down Acuna and Strider, but you kind of think at some point they'll get it going. But
They
until they
have that
do,
too, though. Like, they're putting random guys in their lineup at certain points when the Cardinals played them recently. You're like, really? These guys are starting for the Braves? It kind of just is a reminder of, okay, people are going to nitpick. Siani doesn't hit very well at the bottom, but obviously plays good defense. You know, when Crawford's in there, it kind of feels like the Cardinals are the only team that have these guys at the bottom with the 570 OPSs, and they're not. It's funny that the contenders in the NL are also like that. So maybe to your point, that's a way that the Cardinals could kind of edge their way in if they continue to play good baseball.
for sure. And then offense is down around the league anyways. Like I saw someone
Yeah.
post a league average hitter the other day, 100 WRC plus, and it was like a 680 OPS. It's bad. So anyway, it feels worse when you watch the team every day, but then you take a look around the league. It's like, oh, a lot of teams struggle with this. But then even the Braves, like who are their two best arms? It's Chris Sale and Max Fried. And you're kind of like crossing your fingers every time they go out that they're not going to hit the injured list too. So I'm kind of the opinion now, like this team could be sneaky good, but more so in the sense that there's not these juggernauts out there to compete with as much as you would think. Now, again, a month from now, this could be all be different, right? Mookie Betts comes back for the Dodgers, the rotation gets healthy. This sounds really dumb. The Phillies just keep going on. Like, I don't think there's going to be a point where we start to pick them over those teams, but especially if the Cardinals make an aggressive move or two at the deadline, or I can see even if they do some stuff on the fringes that you feel good about or maybe not good, but like you can see a puncher's chance of upsetting these teams. People like to talk about how the Diamondbacks had the formula, but you go back and look at them. They had two guys with a sub 4 ERA. It was Kelly and Gallen, a 5.7 ERA guy in Fat who like just went amazing in the postseason. And they threw a bullpen game in game 4. So that rotation isn't scaring me. Their bullpen wasn't good. They had 3 good hitters, and I think they had 4 above average hitters in their lineup that year. It's like,
And look at them now. I mean, they added
yeah,
Montgomery, who's struggled obviously, but they were kind of a 1-year wonder as it currently stands. So
yes,
I think I'm on board with all that. When we talk about this Cardinals team, and we're going to ask a little bit later on who's the number 2 that they could reasonably go get. That's
yeah,
something I know people are going to want to talk about. But like when you think about lining up a rotation, maybe it is different by October because those teams that know they're in the playoffs, like the Braves and Dodgers and the Phillies, they're like, hey, if we've got any issues, we're just going to trade for a starter. But
exactly.
like right now, you may not have that menacing 1, 2, 3 punch that you're going to have to face in an LDS or even in a wild card series that in our heads is going to be there for the Cardinals. So maybe they could go farther than people think this year. Is that kind of where obviously got to get
Yeah,
in, but is that
yeah.
kind of where your thinking is?
I think so. And then it's really, I mean, I know we're going to get into this too, and people are frustrated by the run differential side of things, but it is interesting. This team has proven that if it can get a 1, 2 run lead late in games, usually knows how to hold it down well too. So you're not kind of waiting for it to blow up on them. They've been good in close games. Now we're going to see a tough schedule down the stretch. So it'll really test them. Can they continuously do this against good teams? But I just think the National League specifically is so weak this year, and it's kind of what happens when you add a third wild card in and everyone kind of has a chance. It probably kind of, I mean, the Dodgers are going all in and they're struggling with injuries. So they're not a team that's just trying to get in. They're trying to win it all. But I do think they have the talent here. And then also, like, we're still waiting on Goldschmidt and Arenado, and they're in this position. Like, I'm not going to bank on it at this point. I'm not going to assume it's going to happen, but that's always in the back pocket of, well, what if one of these guys is 80% of what they used to be? What if they both are? Like, this lineup goes from, I think it's been about 18th in baseball, most stats in the last 30 days, but the rotations and bullpen have been top 10 ERA wise in baseball the last 30 days, which, I mean, if you told me going into the year they had a top 10 ERA in baseball for a prolonged stretch like this, I'd be like, that's crazy. Did they trade for a top starter or something? So I do think they have a chance, but all this is relative to say they're not going to be the favorites, and it's not the ideal way to build a team. I don't think either of us are like, man, I hope every year they go in with a patchy rotation, kind of an interesting lineup, and see if they can figure it out. Obviously, you want more, but this is what they have right now, and the NL has just kind of collapsed behind them and given them a chance.
Yeah, I think that's exactly kind of where I am too. And how much we believe in the Brewers is going to remain to be seen. They do have good players. Sometimes it feels like
Yeah,
they're doing it with these random guys you've never heard of. It's like they continue to churn out relievers in particular, but they do
yeah.
have good players, and they'll get Devin Williams back, and that'll probably give them a boost. But we'll see. I think the Cardinals are right in a spot to be able to make some noise. The Cubs series is going to matter. They're going to want to not kind of allow what happened against the Royals to continue. And then you look up and go, wait a minute, how did we lose 5 of 6 going into the break? But we'll see how they do. They've got the rotation lined up against the Cubs, obviously. So They should be able to feel pretty decent about that. Let's talk about that margin of victory in the run differential conversation, because you look historically, it's hard to make it very far if you have a negative run differential. And the Cardinals don't just have a negative one, it's pretty healthily negative. Now, how much you buy into that, I guess, depends on your perspective, but they've had a lot of those games where they've been blown up and they've been able to win the close ones to where it hasn't really impacted their record. Derek Gould, I saw you retweet his back of napkin math, as he called it, where the Cardinals have the 30th ranked margin of victory in wins. Like, they're winning games by the slimmest margin of any team in baseball. Is that something that worries you? Is that something that's going to show up at some point for this team? Or is it perhaps more sustainable because of how good we've seen the bullpen be, and should maybe expect it to continue to go that way?
Can I say both?
Yeah.
Like, there's a part
You
of me
can.
that's like, yeah, it makes me feel good that when they have close games, they tend to close them out and win them. Like, you love to see that from a team, but it also is scary that they can never really maintain a lead above 4 runs. And it's pretty much Helsley, Kittredge, JoJo, Fernandez every single outing. And you've seen JoJo really fall off this last month. And it's like, well, what if a couple more of them kind of plateau? Like, Kittredge has actually kind of been better last 30 days, 2.25 ERA, which is surprising. I didn't think it would be that low. Fernandez has been amazing. Helsley's down to a 1.64 last 30. So you've got guys producing, but like, can you do that over 162 games and have the arms that are fresh enough to do in October? And then can you do it in August when you're facing contender after contender every game? It's like, I don't know. And in some ways, it maybe helps them that they have a random blow up every week, because then it's like, okay, let's just throw, I don't know, like John King 3 more innings today, and let's ask Michaelis to give up 5 more runs for 2 more innings, and we'll reset the bullpen a little bit. So like, maybe there's a silver lining there, but it doesn't feel great when you don't beat up on teams ever. But at the same time, if this team was sub 500 and had a good run differential, I don't think anyone's going to be like, well, the run differential's good, so we should be happy about it.
Yeah.
I think
You'd be
it's
like,
kind of
why are
like,
they losing close games? Like, who cares that they're blowing teams out occasionally? You know?
exactly. So it's not nothing, and it's concerning, but I also think you can see the pros of it too. And either way, like, if I want to be optimistic or pessimistic about it, we have to see which one is going to be, because again, World Series pennants are not won in the middle of July. You got to see how the stretch run goes. There's teams that fall apart down the stretch all the time. Maybe that's what the Cardinals' destiny is, or maybe they're like past teams before, where you get past the deadline and they get hot. So we'll see.
Yeah. And I kind of wonder about it too. Like, how much does it matter? Because, and this is going to feel like obvious to say, but the run differential has already happened. Like, what
Yeah.
their run differential is that's what's already happened. It's over. It doesn't necessarily have to be in, like, the day you lose 11-4, it happens and then it's over, but it's going to disproportionately weigh into what that run differential is. I'd rather be the team that's going 3-2 win, 14-2 loss, 1-1 win. Like, and I came into the season thinking the Cardinals absolutely cannot afford to be that type of team, because I didn't think they would have the pitching to be that team. And I said their offense is going to have to be what carries them. We
Yeah.
haven't seen it play out that way. We're kind of waiting, like you said. It feels a little foolish to go, well, maybe Goldie and Arenado, but maybe Goldie and Arenado. And if that ends up being the case, and the pitching has outperformed expectations, and you're John Mozeliak and want to be a little bit aggressive and adding to that at the deadline, you could see where whatever their run differential was in July, it just, they got beat up a couple of times, and it's even happening right now. And as you mentioned, it's an indication not maybe of a terrible baseball team, but of Miles Michaelis hung a lot of curveballs one day, or
Yeah.
Lance Lynn didn't have his best stuff, couldn't locate, but they said, yeah, we're down 6 runs anyway. Why not be down 11? And maybe we can try to get an extra inning out of you. And people don't like that. People didn't like it on Wednesday when Ollie Marmol, they said, wasn't aggressive enough with how he handled the bullpen. And that's like, okay, you have Palante go into the 7th, and it was like, all right, if you're going to have him pitch the 6th, might as well let him get that first out in the 7th, because that's a matchup thing. There was a lefty up. And it feels like, well, he's your 5th starter. Are you really going to push him that far? I get it. Salvi beat him, and boy, did he ever beat him in that 6th inning. And that was kind of the difference at the time. But then your bullpen gives up a run. All right.
Yeah.
Roycroft, I guess, is who came in next. And then it's 6-3, and Goldie homers, you lose 6-4. You can't look back at that and go, well, they shouldn't have left Palante, and they should have really been aggressive. Like, okay, what's that version of aggressive? Because when you said, hey, who's your mop up? Like, John King, throw a few innings. John King's got a 2.6 ERA. Like,
Yeah.
they've got a good, it was a triumvirate, as I call them, at the beginning of the year. And now it's kind of 1-8. You feel pretty darn good. Gio is maybe the exception, but he is kind of assimilated into that long relief role where they're like, dude, you just have to eat it because you're not our setup guy right now. If you want to be on the team, this is kind of what it looks like. And he's pitched okay. I don't know if he's a better option than Leahy in that role, or, some of the, I've been looking at Andre Granillo. He's been wipeout in AAA, and
Yeah.
more of a back end guy, but is he ready for the call up? So they're going to have to kind of figure out and tweak what's the best version of that bullpen. But even when you are down by a run, and once they let Palante go the sixth and gave up a run, it's 4-3 at that point. It just is not a sustainable model to say, okay, go ahead, JoJo, go ahead, Kittredge, go ahead. Sometimes even Ryan Fernandez at this point, I think he's even been better than Kittredge. So if I'm down, I can't, as Ollie Marmol, in the first game of a doubleheader, be like, who's my best non-Helsley arm? Let's throw him here because maybe we'll score a run to tie the game. It's just not, and I get that it's frustrating to fans. It is not the way that Ollie Marmol can manage, because those same people are often going, I'm not trying to rip the fans, but you're going to turn around and then go, he's overusing Kittredge and Helsley and Romero. And there's got to be a balancing act to that. And so the way that Ollie approached it on Wednesday was let Palante ride because he's in our rotation, and this is his last start before the All-Star break. We're going to be very aggressive on taking Graceffo out, and they almost had picked the spot before the game, which I know people aren't going to like, but it's not like Graceffo was lighting it up. He was pitched a couple good innings and then started to maybe tail off a bit, and location was missing. And they said, we're going to get him through Salvi because I don't want to see Libby facing Salvi any more than he has to, which we ended up saying why you'd feel that way. My goodness, he hit that ball far. And so that was kind of the pregame plan. They thought Libby could get him like 3-4 innings and be efficient. And that was where the game 2 went off the rails. And so it's like Libby's allowed to have a bad game once in a while too, because he has pitched really well and has done it under some tough circumstances. So like, that's a little bit of a side tangent, I realize, but you get your thoughts on some of the way that was handled, and then kind of how it goes into this run differential conversation of, there are certain things that when you're down in a game already, it might not feel great on that day, and you could say there's a lack of urgency. But I think for the full 162, you have to manage for the wins more than the run differential.
Exactly. And like you just said, I mean, it's both and, because you have to manage for the wins, but you also have to manage for the wins that are the games coming up too. And
games you
and
can win, like
yeah,
not the ones you're trailing in typically.
And I know Graceffo's starting the next game, so it doesn't give you the most confidence in the world. But if you're down in a game, you're probably like, I like my chances in the game, the next game today that's 0-0, than trying to go for it when I'm down. I get it if they're up 1 or 2 there to be like, okay, let's go for it. Let's make sure we secure the win.
Emptied the tank if they were up by a run in that game. And the same thing in game 2. People were like, well, game 2, he didn't bring in the best relievers so that, we didn't even see JoJo or Helsley all day. It's like, yeah, they didn't have a lead or were tied in the 7th or later. And the guys they did use, okay, Libby gave up 3 earned runs and the inherited runner from Gordon that he gave up. Ryan Fernandez is allowed to give up a run every now and again. He gave up 1 run, and it was irksome because every time the Cardinals would score, the Royals would come back and score. And so you're like, this was our spot. This was our spot. Ollie was just waiting for a reason to deploy a little more aggressively. But at the end of the day, he used 6 relievers that day, and the only ones he didn't use were JoJo and Helsley. You're not going to use Helsley because it wasn't a safe spot. We're a tie game late. And like JoJo didn't pitch, but like John King came in and was great. It just happens that Kittredge gives up a run. I think he was about as aggressive as you could reasonably be. And you can't win every game. And the ones that you're down in, you want to win them, but the offense has to almost show you the reason. What's frustrating about game 2, they did kind of show him the reason. Didn't get enough clutch hits. 7th inning, Goldie striking out to end it was a little rough. They could have got a little more there. But the rare time the bullpen doesn't become lights out for you, it's not like rip the bullpen, they stink. And I felt like Ollie kind of thought I was getting at that. I asked him a question of like, is this an uncharacteristic way to lose? You got the swings you wanted, good ABs, and then the bullpen he's like, well, they're allowed to. And I'm thinking, no, that's what I've been saying all year. I'm not trying to rip you. But anyway, I think we're probably in the same mindset of that.
For sure. And then it's like earlier, you kind of joked, like I said, John King's got a low too. I was like struggling to think like, who is the guy I would throw out there? And it is Gio. I blanked on him. It's like this bullpen, you could argue, go 7 deep. And if they end up messing with Gio at some point, letting him go, you could probably argue it'll go 8 deep at some point. And they're going to go through stretches too. And I mean, like not using JoJo there, he's pitched 7 innings last 30 days.
And you're not tied in a game? Let him. Yeah.
Let him keep resting the arm. The fastball, there's something weird with it right now. So like, let him keep resting. You got 4 games this weekend too. So you have another doubleheader coming up. So you're really gonna have to use the bullpen this weekend. Luckily, you avoid Imanaga and you avoid Steele, but at the same time,
you're doing that.
Yeah, so I don't. I love it. I'll dodge him all day. It's not.
They didn't avoid Hendricks. That's the problem.
Yeah,
right. He's going to start a game.
So he'll probably have 7 innings of no hit ball and get pulled, and then their bullpen will blow up. Thankfully, but
we played this game yesterday on the Big Show. While we're on Hendricks, I want to ask you this, if you know off the top of your head. Andy drew up 10 players, like from the recent baseball past. and we played MLB All-Star or nah. And I had to guess if this guy had ever made an All-Star game. Kyle Hendricks, did he ever make an All-Star game? Andy goes, has he made one yet? I'm like, yet, buddy. Unless he's playing the Cardinals every time, there's not going to be a yet. But did Kyle Hendricks at any point make an All-Star team?
I feel like because you're asking it, it's a no. But I know he's had some good seasons.
I'll
So
wait to even say anything until after you answer because the explanation is interesting.
I'll say no. Because I mean, some of the All-Star voting, it's like 80 games in. You can have a full good season, but like the first like 80 games, you weren't that good. So he's not an All-Star.
Kyle Hendricks led the league in ERA in 2016 and did not make the All-Star team.
Yes, I remember that.
He had a 2.13 ERA that year and did not make the All-Star game. Another one that came from that, Travis Hafner led the league in OPS one year. I think it was 06, a 1097 OPS. Not only did he not make the All-Star team that year, never made the All-Star team, and only finished 8th in the MVP vote with a 1097 OPS and 42 homers.
Ow. I don't understand.
I have no idea how that happened. Probably enough Kyle Hendricks talk there. Little technical difficulties, but we trudge forward. We'll move on to Josh's last topic because he has just produced the heck out of this show with coming up with the ideas for what to do. What's actually possible for the Cardinals to do at the deadline, and is there really a number 2 starter that will be available conceivably that won't require the top prospects that we just don't think they're really going to move anyway? Guys like Walker, guys like Tink Hence, and there are probably some other names that they really don't want to move, but would under the right circumstances. But I'll just ask you, do you have anybody that you're eyeing where you're like, if this guy's available and we think he might be in the Cardinals range to pursue?
Yeah, the one that continuously came up to me until recently, but you addressed this already. I don't think his comments mean he's not getting traded, but it's Max Scherzer. I just feel like it makes so much sense. But like, it's like the question that I was asked of him. I mean, you nailed it. I'm like, he's not going to sit there and be like, and start to breed, like to throw the breadcrumbs out there. Like that'll happen behind the scenes. He doesn't need to tell the foul territory for a trade to happen. Like,
yeah,
not all 29 other teams are like, oh, we can't call the Rangers now because we told them AJ that we can't get traded. So I do think, I mean, he's got to believe they're going to get back into it, but they're 7 games out of the wild card, or 7.5 out of the wild card, 7 out of the AL West. Scherzer makes all the sense to me because obviously you're baking in, well, he could get injured. You've got the age there, but that's why it's not going to take a Tink Hence or Jordan Walker or those type of guys. That's, I don't know, like Tico Roby, Gordon Graceffo. Like, it's hard for me to even picture like what the right thing is, but that feels like the range the Cardinals would be willing to go to. But it also depends, like, do the Dodgers really want him, and where does he want to go? So that's like the one to me that just I would love to see happen. Makes a lot of sense. Then I look at like the names that don't feel like number 2 starters, but are kind of pitching like number 2 starters. So do you see a Jack Flaherty reunion?
No, I don't. I do not. For the record.
Yeah, I don't either. But he's pitching like one. Do you go to Toronto and get like, well, I'm blanking on their lefty right now.
Well, Bassett, Gosman. I don't know if there's a third one. Oh,
like,
yeah.
Like he's not pitching like one.
I don't know his numbers offhand. I've seen him listed as like a guy they could trade.
So like, but I actually think like Gosman's been bad and is a big contract. So I wonder, like, could the Blue Jays want to offload that for like not much? Like, is it Bassett, something like that? Is it an Eric Fetty? Like, those are the kind of guys that make sense to me. I don't see them doing the Garrett Crochet thing. Tarik Skubal I don't think he's gonna be traded. If he is, the Orioles or Dodgers are gonna go all in, and there's no way they compete with that. So I think you're looking at one of those things, and if they can't pull that off, then it's the back end starter, which would feel really disappointing because it's more the same. It does provide depth, so I don't think it's like an unneeded move, but it's not the one that's going to make me think at the beginning of this conversation that, oh, like I actually kind of like their chances against the Dodgers now if they're kind of playing a little injured here. It's kind of more of, okay, you're going to get in the playoffs and you really got to see what happens now. I can't really talk anyone into it other than it's just baseball and weird things happen. So that's just kind of where it feels like we always kind of think there's going to be a lot of starters available at deadlines, but ever since the third wild card, I feel like it's just the market has just been so diluted by stuff. There's not really as many guys available, and all the injuries too, where it's like you look at all these kind of guys you would have said preseason, like, oh, Jesus Luzardo, been bad, injured. That's the one that really stands out to me. But there's other starters out there. Jordan Montgomery, it's like, well, he's been bad, injured. I mean, you didn't really think he's gonna be available, but the Diamondbacks would be a team you think would sell. But all the selling teams, there's not really a lot of arms out there, and then because of that, the price goes up and everyone wants them. So make a long story short here, Max Scherzer makes all the sense in the world to me. And then you kind of go with can we convince another team to do it? I also think it's more of an offseason move, but the Mariners still seem like the team where it's like, come on, give up some pitching, get a bat. Ivan Herrera, like, I don't know. But I
Yeah,
think they want Newbar. I think they'd want Gorman, Donovan,
that
and that's not happening right now.
it's always going to be that line of like both sides could use it. The Cardinals
Yeah,
could use a reorganization of the way. I'm not saying any of them are bad. Like you like having a Gorman with what he can do. Donovan, of course, Newbar. But like it feels like they're one little having a righty version of a lefty guy away from having the balance that they'd want in a lineup.
yeah,
And so like you can't like if this was MLB The Show, I would go edit player, I would just switch his handedness and would be off to the races, right? My franchise would be moving. It's real life. And so the Cardinals have been like stuck in that, I think, for a few years. I don't know how strongly they've ever considered. Like, are they sitting in offices like over the last 2 years weekly going, man, wish we could trade with the Mariners. But like it just doesn't feel like you're quite gonna be on the
yeah.
same tier because if you made like a tiered list of Cardinal bats and then Mariners pitchers, it's like each side is going to want to go one rung up the ladder on the
Agreed.
other team, and that's where the stalemate happens. That's how
Yeah,
we look at it from the outside. I don't
agreed.
know if that's really the way it is, if it works, or if they would tell us we've never talked. Like you guys just shut up. Who knows? But I kind of think it makes sense too. The Cardinals are just so like when you have a player that you're like, no, this guy helps us. We can't that's a hard trade to make.
Yeah,
The last time they think they've done it maybe once, like Colby Rasmus was on the team, but it was also was underperforming. But you have to go 13 years ago to really talk about a deal like that
yeah,
happened mid-season. Alan Craig was not helping them when they traded him for John Lackey. So, it's just they don't really typically do that type of trade. And I understand why, like clubhouse chemistry, there's a lot of reasons to not, as a buyer, trade away from your big league club. It's tough to make those types of deals and thread that needle. I agree with you on the names you brought up. It's like Fetty could be interesting because maybe the White Sox are like, all right, we're not going to trade you Crochet because we want this, that, and the other. But Fetty's pretty good and could fit what y'all need. Even then, though, it's like if the White Sox say we need Cooper Jerpy instead of in our mind, we all have these tiers of Graceffo's below Jerpy, which is like, I mean, who knows? We don't really know, but the shiny
yeah,
new thing is often the one that has the luster in a lot of these trade talks. Whereas Graceffo might just be a dog, and we don't know it yet. I think Palante's a dog, and we're seeing it now. But it's that's one that's interesting that people might not. Is there a team? And I wouldn't necessarily look to trade Andre Palante because I like his moxie. I think he's a good guy to have around. And again, if they did decide to trim a little payroll next year, you could do a lot worse than just sticking him in there for 30 starts and letting him go be himself. But like in our heads, he's not the shiny prospect, never was. So teams around the league aren't gonna want him. I don't know. You just absolutely never know what it could look like. But I'm thinking in terms of if it's a depth move for a number 5, say they strike out on the top options or there just aren't any to be traded, and they do feel like it's still viable to get another guy that just in case. I normally we would say, well, that's complicated because who do you displace? Who do you move out of the rotation? But I think they could do it like right now. The easiest thing is Palante, and I think it would be a screw job because I don't think he really deserves to be moved out. He's done a really fine job. But if their mind is there's more stability, upside, whatever, to do that, you could, if you at one point, I know we keep picking on Gio, but if it's like, if Gio's not working out, maybe that's a move where Palante is just going to be stashed as a long relief guy until such time that he's needed to step back in. You could do it that way. You could do the same thing with Lance Lynn if he continues to struggle, but I don't think that's even on their radar at all. But performance-wise, you can make the case that Palante's actually been maybe a little better than Lynn. So I think there are ways to do it where the Cardinals, like in spring, everybody was like, get another starter. This is going to be an issue. And lo and behold, everybody who said that was right. But they were looking at it going, well, but we're paying these 5 guys, and Steven Matz is one of them. And I saw Steven Matz walking through the clubhouse, and somebody said, hey, how you doing? He's like, yeah, feeling better, doing good. So, in the Cardinals' minds, maybe Steven Matz is still going to be a thing down the stretch. I think you almost have to, from a roster building perspective, out of sight, out of mind. And if he comes back and looks great, then okay, we'll figure out what to do with him. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. I think we all can agree, like, oh, they could use another right-handed reliever that's got leverage experience. They could use another starter that's reliable. They could use a right-handed bat for either the bench or the outfield mix. But in each case, I'm like, what are they? Unless they're trading from the roster, it doesn't feel like there could be a deadline here where the Cardinals don't do anything. And I
yeah.
don't I don't think that should be the case. I think they should really be aggressive and creative and trying to make some bold choices. But if there aren't spots that are obvious for each of, and again, there are things that the fan base would say, well, yeah, you can cut Gio if you really had to. You could trade Dylan Carlson to open up a spot if you had to. You could, there are things you could do that are maybe tough conversations with a guy. How much do you think there should be activity, even if it's as Mo would used to call it, incremental upgrades? We should call that the podcast, incremental upgrades.
Oh yeah.
How much do you think activity should be a major pursuit, that like they shouldn't just do nothing and say, we're going to get healthy, versus maybe your opinion, and some people out there might think, no, that could work. Like if they get healthy, you could squint and see a really good roster coming together. How do you think they should approach it as far as just being active? Mo always says, don't make a trade, just to make a trade. But maybe that could be something that they do this time. How do you kind of stand on that?
Yeah, I think it's hard to tell because it's like I'm gonna assume the best in them right now and say that they actively tried to make the bold move. And if the bold move just wasn't there, then I don't think you have to make a trade to make a trade. I do think it could make sense to still bring in another starter for like get that Jose Quintana type. I mean, it could be Jose Quintana again, except I think the Mets would probably keep him at this point. But like, could do something like that where it's like, yeah, I mean, maybe Oviedo works out, but it's probably no skin off our back if we let him go. I think it'd probably help because you don't know about Steven Matz. And then if Cal Gibson goes down, it's like, well, okay, now this rotation looks really shaky really quick. But to your point about the right-handed reliever, like it'd be nice, but you could convince me there's like 4 or 5 guys in AAA who could be nice. And so do you really need to use the resources to go get Pete Fairbanks or to go get, I don't know, whoever that
Yes, you
right-handed
do
reliever
for Fairbanks.
Yeah, Fairbanks would be so fun.
Just because he's from St. Louis, and I was at his wedding because my wife knows his wife. So
Oh, there
that
you
would
go.
be the reason that I just think it'd be cool. And if you've seen his interviews, he is funny, dude.
He feels like Michaelis.
He should have, and he probably will at some point, but he should have his own podcast. Like all the players that like do their own stuff. If he's not doing media, he's too good. Anyway, that I hear where you're coming from on that. Keep going though. I'm sorry to interrupt, but that one was a good name. The Cardinals, I feel like, should be interested in him. But anyway, that's another.
Yeah, I actually do really like him. But I think like if it's going to take something significant, I can see why. Let's wait till the offseason and see if the Rays still want to move him, type of thing. I do think though the right-handed bat one is one that I just can't like it, especially with the uncertainty of Tommy Edman. They have 2 guys who are above league average against left-handed pitching this year. 2 guys in the entire lineup, and Goldschmidt's one of them. So we're not even talking about baking in Goldie into it.
Yeah.
Goldie's a 119 WRC plus this year, which doesn't feel like that against lefties.
He must have just hit like a few of his homers against him to get that there.
It has to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he's still, I mean, actually he's 286 average, 363 OBP, his slug's really low. So like, but Donovan's about league average, Herrera's a little bit below, and then everyone drops off to 20% below or worse. And so it's like,
even Win against
Win's 106. So Win and Goldie are 2 above, everyone else is below.
Gotcha.
And Donovan and Herrera are just underneath. So it's like, well, it's hard to convince me that, I mean, New, I think sometimes gets talked about like he's a good against left-handed pitching, but he's not really been, and it's a 40 W. Like, so it's like Burleson's been bad against left-handed pitching. So, I mean, I could like a Randall Grichuk, I think makes a lot of sense to me, because then you could do like, you can really get creative where he could play some center field, even though I know it's not the best and you want the defense. Edmund could play some second if you wanted to as well. So I just think it gives you some maneuverability, but then you could also convince me that's Ivan Herrera when he comes back and he DHs or catches DHs. Contreras does the other. You move things around. I think that's the one maybe I would make a move just to make a move. But again, I can sit here and say I'm looking at the names here, and I would think Arenado would be a little bit better, and Dylan Carlson's usually been really good, and he's been terrible this year. And so
he's been better against lefties than righties, but that doesn't say a lot.
It's still 40%, 30% below league average though. So it's like, okay, but that's the one maybe I'd squint a little bit. But again, it's the offense is the thing you think that it was just at some point will get better incrementally. The pitching, I can't really convince myself will get better without making a move to improve it. So again, long story short to say, I think you said bold earlier. I wonder how nervous they get about moving the Ivan Herrera's of the world, moving the not Jordan Walker. I just don't see they're going to do it. I think really maybe Ivan's really the only guy right now that you can think about that they potentially move that has it, that's a bat that's valuable. And they're like, well, what if he's Adolis Garcia? What if he's Randy Rosarina? And I get it, but if you're really going to commit to the Pages thing, commit to it. And if you're not, then I don't know. I'm not saying they should trade Herrera, but that's the guy I would put out there. If there's something.
Are you team Pages as far as like kind of makes sense as the prototype of a backup catcher for like 5 years.
Yeah, but I'm also like, we saw how much improvement Contreras made in 1 year defensively. What if
Yeah.
Ivan does that? And then
Mhm.
he's got the bat, and I think it's really just the arm they're concerned about. I think
Yes.
some game calling, but he's a pretty good framer, a pretty good blocker, so it's not like he's a terrible defender. So, but then even when I talk about Herrera, I'm like, well, who's the guy you trade him for? You don't trade him for Scherzer, you don't trade him for Bassett, you don't. So I'm like, well,
Gotta have a
that's a,
little control if you're gonna trade him for a pitcher, I feel
yeah.
like, the
And
pitcher
then
you're getting back.
yeah, and that's where I go to, like, the Mariners, but that's probably not gonna happen. The Marlins, all their
No.
arms that have control are injured, so that's where I'm like, I can see where they said they try to be bold. People get mad because it's like, "Oh, well, they didn't make the move," but I'm like, "Well, if you're in those rooms, I don't think any of us would have made that deal either." So, that's where I circle back to say it's really fun to think about it, but there's, like, 3 names out there that I'm like, "That actually makes sense. I can see it happening." Otherwise, I just don't see the parts fitting. It's like when you went to that Mariners conversation. I don't the Cardinals will value their pieces more than the other pieces down there, and I mean, I think the Rangers would love to have Yvonne Herrera for a rental pitcher, but that's not going to happen.
Yeah. So, as you're talking, we're on the left-handed stuff. Cardinals need somebody that can hit lefties. The person they need, I know who they need. I don't know that it would happen. I don't know if there would be interest on their side to bring him back, but
Oh, you're
I
going
would
there.
where you go first because I don't know if we're thinking about the same guy, but who would you?
Randy Rosarina? Is that who you're
No, that's a good
Oh,
one.
okay. I
That's a
saw
good
Jeff
one.
Jones put that out. I was like,
He did,
"Oh,
and
interesting."
that would be riskier because if you bring him back and you give up a let me just walk through this. Imagine with me. Put the
Okay.
imaginary glasses on. If you trade, it doesn't matter who you're trading, but if you trade somebody that's younger with, years of control for Randy Rosarena, and a Rosarena stings up the joint, and whoever that person is plays well for the Rays, I don't think you can ever live that down. So
No.
that to me, I almost advocate don't trade for Randy because in whatever way you thought that whole deal couldn't get worse, that would be the way that it actually could get worse. Fate would not allow it to go the Cardinals' way. So I do not think that's a good idea. Do I want it to happen? Of course, because it would be hysterical, but
Oh, yeah.
I'm not advocating it. Tommy Pham is not playing that well this year. His numbers have gone down a little bit, but you mentioned it. League average is like a 680 OPS. He's like league average as a hitter, but he's 788 OPS against lefties.
Okay.
And he's right. He signed during the season, basically. He's a rental for sure. And he's that kind of edge guy,
Mm.
Tommy Pham, and he's on the White Sox. So get your Fetty with him, get your Michael Kopech,
Brebbia.
whatever. Brebbia, trade for Brebbia and Pham, and it probably doesn't cost you much. And I think it helps you win more games. Would you trade? And I don't like to ask this question because I don't want to give the impression that I think this guy stinks because I think he can turn into a good player, but it's going to be somewhere else. Would you trade Dylan Carlson and, a random pitcher from the guy in the minors, not a top prospect, for that combo? Would you do that? Even though we were talking about a rental in the case of Tommy Pham. What do you think about that one?
I'd do it because I think if they don't move Carlson at this deadline, they're gonna move him for nothing in the
For Nick
offseason too.
Robertson.
Yeah, so, like, why not make yourself better right now? And it's gonna suck because Carlson's gonna go on and probably be a pretty good player for the White Sox, but at this point, we all know it's gonna happen, so I'm not gonna hold on to him longer just to avoid the inevitable. Fan would be really helpful, whether it's Brebbia or whoever you get from them, that's probably a valuable piece. And I think it'd be really fun to have Tommy Pham because you've got like those edgy pitchers in the clubhouse, but maybe getting a position player on that side of things too, because it's most of the young guys in the Goldie and Nato. I mean, I know you got Crawford and Carp, but I don't know if I'd call them edgy necessarily. I think Pham could maybe get under some skin in a good way with this team. You love when he's on your team, usually, and you don't like it when he's on the other team. I remember Jeff Jones had mentioned it. We had him on. He talked about how Pham was interested in going to a lot of places this offseason, but the Cardinals were one of them. So he
Yeah.
wasn't like anti going to St. Louis. So there is that little breadcrumb, and it feels like whenever someone wants to play in St. Louis, there you got to move them to the top of the list here. So I like that a lot. That'd make a lot of sense to me. I think again, Randall Grichuk, I think makes sense. He's like a 120 WRC plus guy against lefties this year, and he pretty much only plays for the Diamondbacks against lefties. So he's already kind of a part-time player. I can see them moving on from him.
Right.
So something in that vein, at the very least, I think makes sense. And then it's like when they went and got Quintana in 2022, or they went and got Happ and Lester in 2021. It's like those moves aren't flashy, but they do make an impact. and it is a pretty low cost on it, like the potential for it to blow up on you. I mean, again, we already know the Dylan Carlson thing's going to happen, so I'm just baking that in. Assuming that's already going to happen, I mean, why not get something productive out of it? In worst case, he's not very good, and it's like, well, your offense already wasn't very good, so you didn't really implode anything from it. So I would do that. Would you
Yeah,
do that?
I think probably so. It depends on who that minor league arm is.
That's true.
I just don't want to say, yeah, trade this guy, because then the double A kid that we were talking about, it's like, whoa, what did I do? But I think
Yeah.
like the caliber of name that's like not a high end arm. And I just texted Jeff to get his take, and he always texts back real quick. He said, depends on the arm. So we had the exact same answer. But I think that's kind of where I'm at. Would it happen? Probably not. But also like Brebbia, personality wise, for the bullpen, like you get some vibes guys in there, and I think it could be really interesting. I know that we've talked a lot about leadership and different things, but that having a crew that is, got different personalities and it creates a nice mix is pretty good. So I think that's an interesting one to end on. Josh, appreciate you joining me. We're calling it Philosophical Differences. I'm going to get this out on YouTube and everything, and on podcast. Make sure you subscribe to both of our channels. Mine, the Brenden Schaeffer channel, for Josh. He's with Dealing the Cards podcast. They do lots of live streams, lots of Cardinals content from both of us. Join the Discord. Josh is in there as well, that I started for the B-Schaeff Daily Discord. And good, like, Cardinals conversation during games, even throughout the day. There's different threads of, we're talking about video games or baseball cards or whatever. So if that's something you want, I'll link that in the description to all my videos so people learn about it. But Josh, any parting thoughts for us as we head out of here? Pretty good first episode, I think, minus a couple technical difficulties, but that's just always going to happen.
We'll fix that. It was fun. I'm really interested to see what the vibes are going to be Sunday. You're going to see the All-Star break. You got the draft. This Cubs series, I think, especially because you have a long layoff off of it too, it's either going to be riding high for a week or down in the dumps. So, yeah, I think vibes wise, they really need to finish strong here, because I don't want to hear a week of, oh, now they're only 3 games above 500 and the Cubs are surging and panic mode. And I'm like, okay, please.
Yeah, and I'm going on a vacation next week, a little bit during the All-Star break. It'll bleed into the Cardinals coming back and playing some games on the road there. But yeah, I don't want to have sad vibes on the All-Star break. So we're going to try to make it happen. We'll get back together here soon. I don't know if it'll be next week because of that trip, but we'll try to talk about every week, and we'll call it Philosophical Differences and hang out. So tell your friends about this. It's another new podcast. You didn't need more of me. You do need more of Josh. People need to get to know Josh. He never puts his Twitter handle on the StreamYard little link here, but you changed it. Is it Josh Jaco 98 now?
Yeah,
is
when I originally went for it, I mean, because of the running back, and then there's a Blues player, all the Josh Jacobs were taken. So I was just like MLB, because I like baseball. And now it's like, now it feels weird. So I was like, finally, 98, I'm like, I'll throw it in there. It's finally available. And like once a month, I'll go on there, like, what names are available?
Kind of check.
Yeah. And finally found one. So it's like, finally, I can do it.
All right. So all the Josh Jacobs burners, stop taking Josh's namesake so he can. All right. It'll be good. All right. That's going to do it for this edition of, what are we calling this? Philosophical Differences. What's funny, it's almost like an ironic name, because you and I don't disagree that often, because I feel like we're in kind of the same lane with a lot of it. But your idea was good of like, well, you're a Cardinal fan and doing the blogger stuff, but also like podcasting as well, which is absolutely viable. And you guys do a great job. But like, I have a little more access and have a little bit of a different perspective, but it can almost be tongue in cheek, because I feel like we are going to be able to talk through things in a really effective way. But also, I don't think we're going to very argue that much. But hopefully people enjoy it. I think it's a good vibe. So let us know in the comments what you want to hear from me and Josh moving forward. But we're going to end it here, because I know I take it from Charlie Marlowe, who says, never know how to end a show. That's going to end the show. I'm going to do my signature piece, and we're out of here. Peace. Where is it? There we go. Boom.